You've just stepped off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The terminal gleams with luxury boutiques, Hermès, Chanel, Louis Vuitton. You're about to experience the France you've seen in movies. The France of endless café terraces overlooking the Seine. The France where everyone takes 2-hour lunch breaks and still somehow maintains a world-class economy. The France that invented joie de vivre. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to tell you. You're not entering a wealthy paradise. You're stepping into a country that is quietly, systematically, and irreversibly going broke. A country where the middle class is being compressed into oblivion. Where the brightest minds are fleeing by the thousands. And where the government is sitting on a debt bomb so massive it makes Italy's fiscal crisis look like responsible bookkeeping. The croissants? Still excellent. The wine? Magnifique. The economics? Absolutely terrifying. Welcome to the hidden reality of France's economic decline. Today I'm going to shatter your romantic illusions about this country and show you 9 reasons why France is far poorer than you think. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this isn't just France's problem. It's a warning for the entire Western world. Let's play a game. Imagine you're a young French professional. You did everything society told you to do. You survived the brutal classes préparatoires, those elite preparatory schools that grind students into dust. You earned your master's degree. You speak fluent English. You land what's considered a good job in a mid-sized city like Lyon or Bordeaux. You open your first paycheck and stare at it in disbelief. €1,426 net per month. That's roughly $1,550. In 2024. For a job that required 5 years of higher education and professional qualifications. Now here's where it gets truly insane. Compare your situation to your friend who didn't go to university. Maybe they work as a cashier at Carrefour or clean hotel rooms, or serve drinks at a cafe. They're earning the SMIC, the French minimum wage. As of November 2024, the net SMIC is €1,426 per month. Wait, did you catch that? The median salary and the minimum wage are virtually identical. The gap between barely surviving and being middle class in France is essentially non-existent. In the United States, the difference between a minimum wage worker and a median earner is substantial. We're talking about doubling or tripling your income. In France, it's a rounding error. The difference between flipping burgers and managing a department is maybe €200 to €300 a month after taxes. This phenomenon has a name that should send chills down your spine. Smicardization. It's the great flattening of French society. Over the past 2 decades, France has essentially compressed its entire wage structure into a pancake. Here's how this economic disaster happened. Because the cost of labor is astronomically high for companies in France, and we'll get to the tax nightmare later, employers simply cannot afford to give meaningful raises. So when the government aggressively raises the minimum wage to keep pace with inflation, which they do religiously, the bottom floor rises. But the ceiling stays exactly where it is. The result? The floor is eating the room. In the 1990s, only about 8% of French workers earn minimum wage. Today it's over 17% of the entire workforce. And for millions more, they're hovering just a few euros above it, making the effective Smicardization rate closer to 30%. Imagine the psychological devastation of this system. You study for 5 years. You accumulate stress and debt. You take on management responsibilities. You deal with difficult clients and impossible deadlines. And at the end of the month, you take home barely more than someone stocking shelves at a supermarket. Why bother innovating? Why take risks? Why work harder? Why aim for promotion? This isn't just an economic statistic. It's a motivation assassin. It transforms an entire nation into a participation trophy where everyone gets the same mediocre prize. Barely enough to afford rent. Speaking of rent, if you think that €1,426 goes far because healthcare is free, let me introduce you to the French real estate nightmare. In Paris, a decent studio apartment, and I mean a box where you can literally touch your refrigerator from your bed, costs between €1,200 and €1,500 per month. Do the math. On a median salary, living in your nation's capital is mathematically impossible without wealthy parents or roommates in your 30s. You're not living in Paris. You're camping in it, paying luxury prices for the privilege of sharing a bathroom with strangers. Drive 2 hours north of those luxury Parisian boutiques, and you'll enter a completely different world. This is the Rust Belt of France, the Hauts de France, the Grand Estate. This is where the ghost of French industry haunts abandoned factories. We have this romantic image of France as an industrial powerhouse. We think of Airbus, nuclear power plants, and high-speed TGV trains. Yes, these exist. But here's the brutal truth. They're remnants of a glorious past, not indicators of a vibrant present. France doesn't make things anymore. Manufacturing now accounts for barely 10% of France's GDP. Compare that to Germany, where it's nearly 20%. Or Italy at 15%. Even Poland outpaces France in industrial output as a percentage of GDP. France has deindustrialized faster and more aggressively than almost any other Western nation. And this wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate policy choice. For 40 years, French elites were obsessed with the idea of becoming a post-industrial society. The geniuses in Paris decided that factories were dirty, outdated, and beneath the dignity of the nation that gave the world the Enlightenment. They wanted France to become a country of consultants, designers, luxury brand managers, and artists. They bet everything on services and tourism. They bet on becoming the museum of the world. And in one sense it worked spectacularly. France is the #1 tourist destination on Earth, welcoming nearly 90 million visitors annually. But here's the problem. You cannot build a superpower on waiters and tour guides. You cannot sustain a middle class on seasonal hotel work and museum tickets. The consequences have been devastating. When you lose factories, you lose the high-paying blue-collar jobs that sustain middle-class families in smaller cities and rural areas. When those jobs migrate to Poland or China, entire towns die. The bakery closes. The school shrinks. The doctor retires and isn't replaced. Young people leave and never come back. This is the fuel for the political rage you see on the news. When you see the yellow vests, the gilets jaunes, burning toll booths and blocking highways, they're not doing it because they love chaos. They're doing it because they live in these peripheral ghost towns where the only economic activity left is a super-U supermarket and an Amazon warehouse paying minimum wage. They are the casualties of the museum economy. While Paris sells €3,000 handbags to Chinese tourists, the rest of France is fighting over crumbs. And here's the kicker that perfectly illustrates this disaster. During the COVID-19 pandemic, France realized in absolute panic that it didn't even have the industrial capacity to manufacture paracetamol, basic over-the-counter painkillers. The country of Louis Pasteur, which pioneered vaccine development, had to beg India and China for basic medical supplies. That is the reality of a country that forgot how to build. Let's talk about France's national credit card. You probably hear about the US debt crisis constantly. But here's the crucial difference. The United States has a printing press and controls the world's reserve currency. France does not. France uses the euro. It cannot print its way out of trouble. It relies on the kindness of bond markets and German patience, and both are running thin. In 2024, France's public debt reached 113% of GDP. To put that in perspective, the European Union's famous Maastricht criteria, the rules that were supposed to keep the Eurozone stable, say you're supposed to keep debt under 60% of GDP. France hasn't seen 60% since the internet was invented. Since the mid-1990s. Here's a fact that should terrify you. France has not passed a balanced government budget since 1974. Read that again. For 50 years, half a century, the French government has spent more money than it earned. Every single year. Left-wing governments, right-wing governments, centrist governments, it doesn't matter. The addiction to deficit spending is completely bipartisan. Where does all this borrowed money go? It's not going into infrastructure. French bridges are literally crumbling. It's not going into the military, they're dependent on NATO. It's going into social protection. France spends an absolutely staggering 32 to 34% of its GDP on social spending. That is the highest in the world. Higher than Sweden. Higher than Denmark. Higher than any other developed nation. Now, don't misunderstand me, having a safety net is wonderful. It's genuinely great that nobody in France dies in the street from lack of insulin. But this level of spending is mathematically unsustainable when your economy isn't growing. You're paying for a Rolls-Royce welfare state with a Peugeot economy. And the bill is coming due. In 2024, interest payments on French debt reached 2% of GDP, soon to eclipse the education budget. Think about that devastating reality. France will spend more money paying off past mistakes than it spends educating its future children. The situation has gotten so dire that in September 2024, French bond yields surpassed Spain's for the first time since 2007. When bond markets charge you more interest than Spain, you know you're in serious trouble. If that doesn't scream poorer than you think, I don't know what does. If there's one thing France is world champion at, beating even Brazil at football, it's taxation. Let's go back to that HR office from earlier. Remember that €1,426 paycheck? To get that money into your bank account, a financial murder scene had to take place first. And if you're American, you might want to sit down because this will induce vertigo. Let's say a company wants to hire you for a decent mid-level job. They're willing to spend 60,000 euros per year on you. That's the coût total, the total cost to the employer. First, the government takes a massive bite called employer social contributions. Healthcare, pensions, unemployment insurance, workplace accident insurance, the list goes on. This immediately removes nearly 17,000 euros. Poof, gone. Now your gross salary, the number written on your contract, is about 43,000 euros. But wait, you don't actually get 43,000 euros. Now the government takes employee social contributions. Another huge chunk disappears for your pension, health insurance, unemployment insurance. This brings you down to roughly 33,000 euro net salary. But we're still not done. Now you have to pay income tax on that net salary. By the time the money actually hits your bank account to buy groceries, nearly half of what your employer paid for your labor has vanished into state coffers. France has the highest tax burden in the OECD. The government confiscates approximately 45 to 48% of the entire country's GDP in taxes and social charges every single year. This creates a vicious cycle of poverty that functions like an economic boa constrictor. Companies can't afford to pay high net salaries because the taxes on top are astronomical. Employees have no disposable income to spend, so the local economy stagnates. The government sees the stagnation and says, "We need more money to fix this," and raises taxes again. The squeeze gets tighter and tighter, and you don't realize you're suffocating until you try to save money at the end of the month and realize you simply can't. And God help you if you try to get rich. France has a cultural allergy to wealth that borders on pathological. They literally had a solidarity tax on wealth for years that taxed you just for having assets, regardless of whether those assets generated income. It scared away thousands of millionaires and entrepreneurs. President Macron replaced it with a real estate wealth tax, but the message remains crystal clear. Success is suspicious. Please apologize for it by giving us half. You probably saw the news in 2023. Paris was burning. Garbage was piled high in the streets. Riot police were charging through clouds of tear gas. Millions of people were on strike. What caused this civil war? A military coup? Economic collapse? No. The government proposed raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. 2 years. To the rest of the world, this looked completely insane. In Germany, the retirement age is heading to 67. In the UK and US, it's similar or higher. But in France, asking people to work 2 more years was treated like a human rights violation worthy of revolution. But here's the dark reality those protesters didn't want to admit. The French pension system is a demographic Ponzi scheme. It's a pay-as-you-go system. The money taken from your paycheck today isn't being saved and invested for your future retirement. It's being wired directly to a retiree right now. You are literally paying for someone else's vacation in Nice, and you're hoping that future workers will do the same for you. This system works beautifully when you have 4 workers for every retiree. That was France in the 1960s. Today it's roughly 1.7 workers for every retiree, and that ratio is dropping fast. France is getting old. The baby boomers are retiring en masse. The birth rate, while higher than the rest of Europe at 1.8 children per woman, is still well below the replacement level of 2.1. So you have a shrinking pool of young, underpaid workers. Remember the Smicardization? Trying to support a growing army of retirees who are living longer than ever thanks to modern medicine. The math is brutal. It simply doesn't work. The pension system is bleeding billions of euros annually. To plug the hole, the government has 2 choices: cut pensions, political suicide. Or raise the retirement age, also political suicide, just slower. So the country is stuck in a paralyzed state of denial. Young workers know they will probably never see a full pension, yet they're taxed to death to pay for current retirees. It's an intergenerational robbery that's making the working population poorer every single day with no end in sight. Walk into a Goldman Sachs office in London, a Google office in Zurich, or a research lab in Montreal. Look at the employee badges. You'll see a shocking number of French names. France produces brilliant minds. The education system, specifically the elite grandes écoles, is fantastic at churning out world-class engineers, mathematicians, and financiers. But France cannot keep them. This is the brain drain, and it's bleeding the country dry of its most valuable resource, human capital. Imagine you're a top-tier AI researcher or software engineer. Let me present you with 2 options. Option A, stay in Paris. Earn 45,000 euros per year. Pay 50% in taxes. Struggle to rent a 30 square meter apartment. Deal with a rigid hierarchy where you'll wait 15 years for a promotion based on seniority, not merit. Face a culture that treats entrepreneurial failure as a permanent social scarlet letter. Option B. Move to California or Switzerland. Earn $150,000 per year. Pay 30% in taxes. Live in a house with a yard. Lead a team immediately based on your skills. Work in a culture that celebrates risk-taking and treats failure as a learning experience. This isn't a hard choice. Recent surveys show that nearly 15,000 young graduates from French engineering and management schools choose to start their careers abroad every year. And according to the study, 70% of these talented individuals believe France is in decline, while 81% and 74% are concerned about the political and economic situations respectively. The numbers tell a devastating story. Estimates suggest that between 2.5 and 3 million French citizens now live abroad. But it's not a random sample. These are the risk-takers, the entrepreneurs, the scientists, the innovators. When the smartest people leave, innovation leaves with them. This explains why there are more French founders of unicorn companies, valued over $1 billion, in the United States, 46, than in France itself, which has around 22. There is no French Google, no French Amazon, no French Microsoft. The few French tech giants that have emerged in the last 20 years? Their founders left. Snowflake, the cloud computing giant? Founded by a French engineer in the US. Moderna, the biotech company that helped create COVID vaccines? Led by a French CEO in America. France is effectively subsidizing the rest of the world. French taxpayers pay for the expensive education of these geniuses through their world-class public university system. Then the US, UK, Swiss, and Canadian economies reap all the profits from their labor. It creates a country that feels stagnant. A country where ambition is capped. If you want to stay, you accept the ceiling. If you want to break through, you buy a plane ticket. But wait, you argue? At least they have free healthcare. At least the trains are fast. At least the public services work. Here's the saddest part of France's decline: the free stuff is breaking. For decades, the unspoken social contract in France was simple. We'll take half your income in taxes, but in return we'll give you world-class public services, the best healthcare, excellent schools, efficient transportation, and a strong safety net. That contract is now void. Visit a French emergency room today. You might wait 10, 12, sometimes 20 hours to see a doctor. There are medical deserts throughout rural France where you cannot find a general practitioner to save your life, literally. Doctors are retiring in droves, and the numerous clauses system artificially kept the number of new medical students low for decades, creating a massive shortage. Look at the education system. French students used to rank among the best in the world in mathematics. In the latest PISA international rankings, France has dropped to the middle of the pack, with inequality and outcomes skyrocketing. Teachers are underpaid and demoralized, leading to a recruitment crisis where the government is hiring unqualified staff just to put warm bodies in classrooms. The justice system? Notoriously slow and underfunded. Some civil cases take years to reach trial. The infrastructure? Crumbling. Roads with potholes, bridges that need repair, public buildings falling apart. The tragedy is that the French people are still paying luxury prices, those astronomical taxes we discussed, but receiving budget-level service. When the public sector fails, those with money opt out. They send their kids to private schools. They go to private clinics for healthcare. They use private security services. They essentially pay twice, once for the public system through taxes and again for private alternatives that actually work. This creates a two-tier society. The wealthy insulate themselves from the decline while the poor and middle class are left with crumbling infrastructure and deteriorating services. The word égalité, equality, carved onto the front of every town hall is starting to look less like a promise and more like a cruel joke. If economics is the hardware of a country, psychology is the software. And France's software is glitching badly. Where do you think the most pessimistic people in the world live? War zones? Countries with extreme poverty? Failed states? You'd be wrong. Year after year, global surveys like those conducted by BVA and Gallup consistently show that the French are the most pessimistic people on earth. They often rank lower than citizens of Iraq, Afghanistan, Colombia, or Syria regarding their view of the future. This is the hidden tax on the French economy: collective depression. Why is a country with 5 weeks of paid vacation, the best cheese in the world, magnificent wine, and high-speed trains so utterly miserable? It comes down to the gap between expectation and reality. The French are raised on the myth of La Grande Nation. They grow up hearing about Napoleon, Charles de Gaulle, the Enlightenment, Descartes, Voltaire, Rousseau, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and French as the language of diplomacy. They're told from childhood that they are the center of the civilized world, the beacon of culture and reason. But when they open their eyes and look around, they see a country that is shrinking in global influence. They see English replacing French in business and diplomacy. They see their culture being Netflixized and homogenized. They see their economy falling behind. They see their political system paralyzed and ineffective. This creates a collective cognitive dissonance. It's like being a fading aristocrat who still lives in the family castle but can no longer afford to heat it. You wear the velvet robes but you're shivering inside. This pessimism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Consumers don't spend because they fear the future. Saving rates in France are unusually high. Entrepreneurs don't start businesses because they fear that failure is permanent. French bankruptcy laws make it much harder to bounce back than in the US, where failure is often seen as a badge of honor, a learning experience. Voters embrace political radicalism because they feel the system is fundamentally rigged against them. Marine Le Pen's far-right party and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's far-left movement gain support not because their policies are necessarily sound, but because people are desperate for change. This psychological weight is perhaps the hardest thing to fix. You can change a tax law in a week with a parliamentary vote. You cannot change a national mood in a decade. France is currently trapped in a cycle of declinism, an obsession with its own decline that makes it almost impossible to rally the country for the painful reforms it actually needs. Before you sit back smugly in your chair in Chicago, London, Sydney, or Toronto and laugh at the French, let me give you a stark warning. France is not an anomaly. It's a time machine. France is showing you exactly what happens when a wealthy Western democracy runs out of road. It is the test case for a specific type of economic disease that is coming for everyone else. Look at the symptoms. 1. Aging population. France hit the demographic wall first, but the US, Canada, and most of Europe are only 10 to 15 years behind. Birth rates are plummeting across the developed world. 2. Deindustrialization. France gutted its factories faster, but the American Rust Belt, British manufacturing towns, and Australian industrial regions are telling the same story. 3. Debt addiction. France's 113% debt to GDP ratio is shocking, but the US is racing to catch up, running trillion-dollar deficits in peacetime. Canada, the UK, and Japan are all on similar trajectories. 4. Political polarization. The collapse of the centrist parties in France. The socialists and traditional Republicans are basically dead, and the rise of the extremes on both left and right is a preview of the polarization tearing apart the US, UK, and other Western democracies. 5. Unsustainable welfare promises. Every Western country has made pension and healthcare promises to aging populations that their shrinking working-age populations cannot possibly fulfill. France is the laboratory. It's trying to maintain a 20th century standard of living with 21st century demographics and 19th century economic thinking. If France collapses, if the bond vigilantes finally attack French debt, if the EU has to bail out the second largest economy in Europe, it won't just be a French problem. It will be a global financial cataclysm. It will be 2008, but with better wine and angrier rioters. So when you look at France, don't just see a country in decline. See a warning flare. See your own future if your country doesn't make hard choices now. So is France doomed? Is it destined to become nothing more than a sprawling open-air museum where tourists throw coins at the natives taking selfies in front of the Eiffel Tower? Not necessarily. France has bounced back before. This is a country that survived the 100 Years' War, the French Revolution, 2 world wars, Nazi occupation, and Charles de Gaulle. There's a resilience in the French character, a stubbornness that shouldn't be underestimated. There are signs of life. The tech scene in Paris, centered around Station F, the world's largest startup campus, is growing. There's a generation of young French people who are tired of the old dogmas, who want to work, build, and disrupt. They're fighting against the gravity of the system, pushing for reform, embracing entrepreneurship despite the obstacles. But let's be brutally honest, the math is relentless. The debt is real. The aging population is real. The poverty of the middle class is real. The brain drain is real. The lack of competitiveness is real. France is currently living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The illusion of wealth is maintained through debt, and the social peace is maintained by spending money the state doesn't have. The question is not if the correction is coming. The question is when and how painful it will be. For you, the viewer, the lesson is simple. Don't let the postcard fool you. Don't let the luxury brands distract you. Don't let the romantic imagery cloud your judgment about economic reality. Most importantly, look at your own country's balance sheet. Look at your own government's pension promises. Look at your own nation's debt levels, birth rates, and tax burdens. Because the French disease is contagious, and you might already be infected without realizing it. If you want to understand which country might be next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Our next video will examine why Germany, Europe's supposed economic powerhouse, is quietly dying, and it makes the French situation look like a picnic. If I shattered your Emily in Paris fantasy just a little bit today, if you learned something that made you see France differently, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what shocked you most. Are you French and living abroad? Tell us your story in the comments. I bet it involves reason number 4 or 6. And remember, the truth about economics is rarely as beautiful as the travel brochure. But understanding the truth is the only way we can hope to fix it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.